Have you ever loved someone who slowly made you doubt your own sanity? Not through screaming or violence, but through quiet corrections, backhanded compliments, and carefully planted seeds of confusion? They didn't insult you. They just wondered if you remembered it wrong. They didn't control you. They just worried about the people you chose to spend time with. And somehow, without realizing it, you started apologizing more, laughing less, walking on eggshells in a home that once felt safe. This is not clumsiness. This is not miscommunication. This is what it feels like to stand in the orbit of someone with narcissistic personality disorder. They don't show up in obvious ways. That's the myth. We think of narcissists as loud, vain, selfish people who dominate every room. But the most dangerous ones are quiet, polished, empathetic seeming. They quote psychology books and use therapy language like weapons. They reflect your wounds back to you, not to heal you, but to disarm you. And once you open up, once you trust, once you expose your softest parts, they tighten the grip. Subtly, casually, repeatedly. Carl Jung warned that what is unconscious in us will be lived as fate. That's the horror of encountering a narcissist. They don't just manipulate your present, they activate your past. If you grew up walking on eggshells, you'll think their mood swings are your fault. If you were taught love equals sacrifice, you'll see their coldness as a test of your loyalty. You won't see the signs, not because you're naive, but because your nervous system has been conditioned to ignore them. And that's what they count on. They don't want love. They want control. But they'll sell it as connection. They'll make you feel like you're the only one who truly understands them. And the moment you buy into that fantasy, they begin rewriting your reality. You'll start saying things like, "They're just misunderstood. They've had a hard life. They're not like this with anyone else." And you'll mean it. Because the narcissist is an expert illusionist, and you, an empathic believer. But here's the truth, real connection doesn't require you to shrink. Real love doesn't ask you to betray your instincts. Real safety doesn't feel like silence. In this video, we're going to expose the hidden signs of narcissistic personality disorder, the red flags they disguise as virtues, the confusion they cause that you've mistaken for chemistry, and the subtle emotional damage that lingers long after they're gone. This isn't about revenge. It's about awakening. Because the moment you can name what you've been through is the moment you stop reliving it. They didn't break you. They distorted you. And starting today, you begin remembering who you were, before the performance, before the charm, before the slow unraveling of your truth. The most dangerous narcissists are not the loud ones. They are the ones who walk into your life as everything you ever wanted. They speak your language. They resonate with your pain. They seem emotionally available, spiritually aware, even wounded in a way that makes you feel uniquely chosen to love them. And because their mask is not arrogance but depth, you let them in. Not just into your schedule but into your psyche, into your story, into your sacred doubts. They don't demand your trust. They earn it, carefully, patiently, methodically. At first, it feels divine. You feel seen, deeply. You finish each other's sentences. You have long conversations at midnight about trauma and philosophy. You talk about fate, synchronicity, energy. And somewhere between their soft questions and shared playlists, you begin to think, maybe this is it. Maybe I've finally found someone who gets me. But that belief isn't built on truth, it's built on performance. And the moment you start believing in the fantasy, they start writing the script. Carl Jung spoke of the persona, the mask we wear to navigate society. For people with narcissistic personality disorder, the persona is not just a tool. It's a survival mechanism. An armor built around an empty core. Behind the charm lies a fragile ego that cannot tolerate shame, cannot accept criticism, and cannot handle real intimacy. But they know what it looks like. They've studied it. And so, they mimic it with chilling accuracy. You won't recognize the manipulation at first, because it doesn't come in shouts, it comes in size. You'll share a joyful moment and they'll go quiet. You'll make a joke and they'll say, "That was a bit harsh." You'll voice a need and they'll respond with, "Wow, I thought you were more evolved than that." It's subtle, elegant, wrapped in faux spirituality or therapy speak. And so you doubt yourself. You reflect. You adjust. Not realizing that each small shift is one step further away from your own center. And this is how they trap you. Not with cruelty, but with confusion. You don't stay because of what they give you. You stay because you keep trying to understand them. You stay because you think, if I could just explain it the right way, they'll hear me. But they won't. Because they're not listening to understand. They're listening to control the narrative. The empath, in particular, is vulnerable to this dynamic. You grew up learning to read moods, to soothe chaos, to anticipate needs that were never yours. And so, when a narcissist enters your life, their emotional inconsistency doesn't repel you. It feels familiar. You don't run. You work harder. You lean in. You mistake their coldness for depth, their disapproval for wisdom, their volatility for passion. But here's what's really happening. Your psyche is trying to resolve an old wound using a new character. You are hoping that this time, if you love hard enough, if you're patient enough, if you explain gently enough, they won't leave. They'll change. They'll choose you. And in doing so, you forget to choose yourself. What makes narcissistic personality disorder so insidious is not just the behavior itself, but how it bypasses your logical defenses and infects your sense of reality. You're not fighting a person. You're fighting a reflection of who you think you must become to be worthy of their approval. And slowly, you become someone you no longer recognize. You stop sharing your wins, because they downplay them. You stop expressing your needs, because they call you needy. You start filtering your truth through a lens of, will this upset them? And by the time you realize what's happening, the erosion is almost invisible, because it's been internal. Jung warned us that, until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate. And this is exactly how the narcissist survives. They don't destroy you with violence. They activate your fate. They find the part of you that was already wounded, already doubting, already trained to perform for love. And they feed it, until you confuse that wound with worthiness. You begin to rationalize everything. Their hot and cold behavior? Maybe they're just overwhelmed. Their jealousy? It must mean they care. Their dismissiveness? They probably had a tough day. And with every justification, you hand over another piece of your power. Not because you're weak, but because, over time, you may even start to gaslight yourself. You replay conversations in your head, wondering if you really were too emotional. You question your memory. You rehearse your words. You seek their validation for how to feel about things that happen to you. And when they give it, even in crumbs, it feels like water in a desert. You cling. Not to the person, but to the possibility. But here's the truth. The narcissist doesn't love you. They love your reflection of them. The moment you stop mirroring their ideal image, the moment you become too real, too questioning, too whole, they begin to retreat. Or worse, they begin to punish. Not overtly, but with silence. With withdrawal. With, I just need space to think. And suddenly, you're apologizing again. For existing too vividly. And so the cycle continues. Idealization, devaluation, discard. Then, if you start to pull away, the cycle restarts. They love bomb. They say they miss the old you. They dangle the memory of connection. But it's not real. It's not love. It's a hook. A leash. A trap disguised as reconciliation. This is why recognizing the signs matters, not just so you can leave, but so you can wake up. So you can stop rewriting the story to protect their image. So you can start rewriting your own. Because once you name the pattern, you're no longer trapped inside it. You see it. You feel it. You trust it. And that's the beginning of everything. Recognizing someone with narcissistic personality disorder, NPD, is not always about spotting grandiosity or vanity. In fact, many with this disorder operate through covert strategies, laced with subtlety and psychological finesse. To understand the signs, we must dig deeper, not just into behavior, but into the architecture of the narcissistic psyche. And to do that, we turn again to Carl Jung. For Jung, the ego is a fragile construct, desperately trying to defend itself against the chaos of the unconscious. In the narcissist, this defense becomes pathological. What you see on the outside, a curated charm, emotional eloquence, flashes of humility, is not an expression of self. It's a fortress hiding a wounded core. Trigger number 1. When you stop playing their script. The narcissist doesn't want a partner, they want a co-star. As long as you play your role, agreeable, admiring, emotionally available on demand, they are content. But the moment you step out of character, even slightly, something shifts. You question a decision they made. You express a boundary. You ask a deeper question they're not ready to face. And suddenly, the warmth turns cold. The charm turns clipped. You feel it before you understand it. Their face goes blank, their voice changes, their eyes lose light. The mask slips. Example. I felt really hurt when you canceled last minute again. I wish we could communicate better. Them. You're always so dramatic. You ruin everything with your emotions. In that moment, you're not dealing with a misunderstanding, you're witnessing a psychic wound. Your honesty is not heard as vulnerability, it's registered as a threat. And because the narcissist cannot self-reflect without shame, they deflect. Their survival depends on it. Trigger number 2. When you receive praise from others. At first, they seem supportive. I'm so proud of you, they say. But look deeper. Their support only flows when your success reflects well on them. When it doesn't, or worse, when it places you in the spotlight, they become agitated. They may make passive-aggressive remarks, withdraw affection, or suddenly become critical of unrelated things. Example. I got offered the promotion. I'm so excited. Them. I guess they were just desperate for someone. Timing's everything, right? It sounds subtle, deniable. But that's the design. A narcissist cannot tolerate not being the center. Your success disrupts the hierarchy they depend on to feel superior. And so they undermine it, not overtly, but psychologically. Trigger number 3. When you set a boundary without explaining. Narcissists thrive in ambiguity. They rely on your guilt, your explanations, your inner conflict. So when you set a firm, quiet boundary, without drama, without justification, they panic. Because now you are no longer under their influence. You've become unpredictable, uncontrollable, and in their world, that means dangerous. Example. I won't be joining this weekend. I need some time for myself. Them. Wow. Guess I don't matter anymore. You've changed. But notice, the guilt they express isn't genuine sadness. It's control dressed as hurt. They don't want to understand your need. They want to shame you for having one. Each of these moments, small, everyday, seemingly insignificant, carry weight in a relationship with someone with NPD. Because they puncture the illusion. They threaten the false self they've carefully constructed. And when the illusion is threatened, the narcissist doesn't adapt. They retaliate, emotionally, psychologically, sometimes spiritually. Trigger number 4. When you hold them accountable without emotion. The narcissist doesn't fear confrontation, they fear calm truth. When you call them out in rage or tears, they feel validated. You're overreacting, they'll say. You're unstable. But when you name their behavior with clarity and composure, they're caught off guard. Because now, they can't flip the script. Now, you're not in reaction, you're in awareness. Example. When you dismissed me in front of our friends, that crossed a boundary. I won't tolerate that again. Them. You've really been reading too many self-help books lately. Notice the shift. They don't engage the truth. They mock the container of it. They belittle your growth, not because it's invalid, but because it threatens their control. Jung would call this a direct collision with the shadow, the part of the psyche that houses all the traits we deny or reject in ourselves. For the narcissist, this shadow is massive. Any attempt to reflect it back, to offer honest feedback, to request mutual respect, activates intense psychological defense. They may withdraw, retaliate, or suddenly play victim. You become the problem, the ungrateful one, the unstable one, all because you named what they spend their life hiding. Trigger number 5. When you prioritize yourself consistently. This is the long game. At first, they're attracted to your independence. It makes you a challenge. It flatters their ego to win you. But over time, your autonomy begins to feel like rejection. If you keep prioritizing your dreams, your peace, your friendships, they experience this not as healthy differentiation, but as abandonment. And they'll respond accordingly. Example. You, I'm going to spend the weekend offline, just need a reset. Them. Right. Must be nice to take breaks from people you care about. The guilt is subtle, implied. But the narcissist isn't interested in partnership. They're interested in power dynamics disguised as intimacy. And every time you rise into your wholeness, you disrupt that dynamic. They'll try to pull you back, not because they miss you, but because they miss the control they had over you. As Jung would say, where wisdom reigns, there is no conflict between thinking and feeling. But in the narcissist's world, your thinking must be their thinking. Your feelings must orbit their feelings. Otherwise, you're perceived as a threat. Trigger number 6. When you stop explaining yourself. One of the greatest signs of healing is when you stop over-explaining your choices. To a narcissist, this feels like emotional mutiny. They depended on your self-doubt, on your habit of seeking approval, on your fear of being misunderstood. And now, your silence speaks louder than any apology ever could. Example. You, I'm no longer available for this dynamic. Them. So that's it? You're giving up? After everything I've done for you. This isn't a conversation. It's a guilt trap. But you've already seen it. You don't bite. You walk away, not because you're cold, but because you're clear. That clarity burns through their illusions like sunlight through fog. And in that light, they panic. Because now, you've become what they fear the most, someone who sees them without illusion and loves themselves enough to walk away. Trigger number 7. When you mirror their behavior back to them. Nothing terrifies a narcissist more than being treated the way they treat others. When you respond with the same passive silence they used to punish you, when you withhold energy the way they did for control, when you stop reacting entirely, they feel exposed. Not because they suddenly understand your pain, but because they see their tactics lose power. Example. Them. I guess you're not even going to ask how I'm doing. You didn't ask last week when I was in crisis, either. For the first time, they're forced to confront the imbalance, not because you shouted, but because you reflected. And that reflection is like a crack in the mirror they so carefully polished. Carl Jung taught us that projection is one of the most common, unconscious defenses. Narcissists live in projection. They cannot integrate the darker parts of themselves, so they unconsciously place them onto others. You become too sensitive, too dramatic, too selfish, when in reality, those are the very traits they refuse to own. And when you stop carrying those projections, when you hold up a metaphorical mirror and say, "This is not mine," you initiate an energetic fracture in the dynamic. Trigger number 8. When you validate yourself publicly. A narcissist survives on control over narrative. They want to shape how others see you, how you see yourself, how the relationship is perceived. But when you start speaking truth, especially out loud, especially in front of others, they panic. Because now, their greatest fear comes true. You are no longer silent. You are no longer a secret keeper. Example. You, actually, I didn't feel supported in that moment. I felt manipulated. Them. Wow. You're seriously making me out to be a monster now. They're not responding to your words, they're reacting to the loss of narrative control. To them, you validating your reality feels like betrayal. But to you, it feels like rebirth. This is where many survivors of narcissistic abuse face the greatest test: guilt. Because speaking the truth out loud often comes with backlash. Smear campaigns, gaslighting, accusations. But Jung reminded us, the most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely. And part of that acceptance means no longer hiding the truth to protect someone who never protected you. Trigger number 9. When you stop playing the emotional rescuer. Perhaps the most deeply rooted dynamic with narcissists is the unspoken contract. You will rescue me, and in return, I will occasionally give you love. They show you their pain, their trauma, their childhood wounds, and you feel special, chosen to help, to heal, to save. But what you don't see is that this role was never temporary. It was the point. Example. Them. You're the only person I've ever opened up to. You. And yet, you still make me feel invisible. The moment you step out of the rescuer role, the moment you stop interpreting their behavior through a lens of compassion only, they become cold, or cruel, or distant. Because now you've broken the agreement, they wanted your healing energy, not your clarity. This is the deepest trap for the empath. You fall in love with potential, with glimpses of vulnerability, with the belief that if you just love them better, they'll finally become who you saw at the beginning. But that version wasn't real. It was a mask, a rehearsal, a hook. And when you realize that, when you stop rescuing and start reclaiming, you don't just trigger the narcissist. You unhook yourself from the entire illusion. Each of these triggers doesn't just expose the narcissist. It illuminates your own growth. Because the moment you stop adjusting yourself to preserve their comfort is the moment you begin living in your own truth. And that is what they fear most, not being exposed, but being left behind by someone who finally woke up. Her name was Rachel. On the surface, she looked like she had it all together. A stable job, a small circle of close friends, a quiet confidence that made people trust her. But underneath that calm exterior lived a question that gnawed at her every night. Why do I always feel like I'm the one who needs fixing? She had spent the last 2 years in a relationship with a man named Marcus. Marcus was thoughtful, articulate, and disarmingly gentle in his tone. He never raised his voice. He read spiritual books. He quoted Brené Brown. He told Rachel often that she was too much, and then later said it was a compliment, because her emotional depth was rare. At first, she believed him. She even admired him. He seemed enlightened, above the messiness of ordinary relationships. But the deeper she fell, the more she noticed something she couldn't explain. She was shrinking. It began with little things. Marcus questioned her friendships, subtly, gently. "Don't you think she drains your energy?" he'd say about her best friend. Rachel stopped texting as much. Then it was her family. "I feel like your mom just doesn't understand your journey," he whispered one night. And so Rachel distanced herself. The farther she moved away from the people who grounded her, the more dependent she became on Marcus's approval. And he gave it, strategically. Praise was a reward, affection a currency. If she said something that aligned with his worldview, she was in tune. If she asked too many questions, she was resistant to growth. He didn't yell. He didn't threaten. But somehow, she always felt guilty. Always doubting herself. Always trying to show up better. Carl Jung once said that the greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents. Rachel, like many empaths, grew up in a household where peace was earned, not given. Her father withdrew emotionally when upset, and her mother constantly mediated everyone's emotions but her own. So when Marcus pulled away in silence after an argument, Rachel didn't see it as manipulation. She saw it as her responsibility to fix it. When he gave her the silent treatment for a weekend, she sent long, vulnerable texts. When he returned with sudden warmth, she felt relief, not anger. She had been trained for this dynamic long before she met him. But the turning point didn't come in a dramatic blow-up. It came in stillness. One evening, Rachel met an old friend for dinner, the first in months. Her friend asked, gently, "Are you happy?" And for the first time in years, Rachel couldn't answer. She went home that night and sat in silence. Not the kind Marcus weaponized, but a silence of truth. A silence that didn't need permission. A silence where her body spoke louder than her thoughts. Her stomach tightened. Her breath shallowed. Her heart whispered, "You're disappearing." And she finally listened. The next morning, Rachel didn't do what she always did. She didn't send a long message to Marcus about her feelings. She didn't apologize for the energy in the room. She didn't ask if he was okay. Instead, she took out her journal and wrote down every moment she had doubted herself in the relationship, every time she had explained her emotions, apologized for her needs, rewritten her truth to match his tone. And for the first time, the story was no longer blurry. It was sharp, unmistakable. A pattern, not a coincidence. A strategy, not a misunderstanding. In the days that followed, she didn't announce her awakening. She didn't confront Marcus with fire or fury. She observed. She watched him minimize her again when she mentioned a small win at work. She noticed how he interrupted her whenever she expressed doubt about one of his ideas. She saw, with painful clarity, that he wasn't actually interested in who she was, only in how well she reflected him. The illusion had cracked. And with every new interaction, it shattered further. And then came the moment of truth. One evening, Marcus made a joke about how emotional she'd been lately. "It's like you're addicted to intensity," he laughed. But this time, Rachel didn't flinch. She looked at him and said, "Or maybe I've just finally stopped numbing myself to how small I've become around you." His face changed. That brief flicker, confusion, then panic, then contempt. She had broken the rule, don't see him too clearly. Don't speak the truth out loud. But she didn't take it back. That night, Rachel did something tangible. She blocked his number, not to punish, but to protect. She deleted old voice notes he had sent during his love-bombing phase. She archived their photos, not out of spite, but to stop the nostalgia from gaslighting her memory. She went to her social media accounts and removed his comments, not to erase the past, but to reclaim the space. These were not dramatic acts. They were sacred closures. Every digital door she shut became a psychic door she opened within. And for the first time in 2 years, she slept. Deeply, peacefully, without waiting for the ping of a message. Without rehearsing a response. Without scanning the silence for danger. Her nervous system exhaled. Her intuition reawakened. Her spirit began to return. Rachel didn't walk away from Marcus in rage. She walked away in awareness. And that made all the difference. Because when you leave a narcissist in anger, they still control the narrative. But when you leave in clarity, they lose access to the part of you they depended on, your confusion, your guilt, your self-doubt. Rachel's healing wasn't linear. There were days she missed him, not the real him, but the version she had believed in. There were moments she questioned herself. Was I too harsh? What if I misunderstood? These thoughts crept in like fog, but now she had tools. She no longer entertained every thought as truth. She examined. She reflected. She grounded. She began seeing a therapist, not because she was broken, but because she was ready to understand the roots. And in therapy, she saw how deeply her childhood had primed her for someone like Marcus. She remembered how often she had been praised for being so mature as a child, for handling things alone, for being low maintenance. And she realized how this programmed her to believe that love meant endurance, that affection had to be earned, that needs were burdens. Her healing wasn't about Marcus, it was about waking up to a lifetime of internalized conditioning. Carl Jung believed that individuation is the process of becoming who you truly are by integrating the shadow. For Rachel, this meant not just identifying Marcus as a narcissist, but owning the parts of herself that had allowed the dynamic to continue. Her fear of abandonment. Her habit of emotional caretaking. her belief that being chosen equated to being valuable. She didn't shame these parts. She welcomed them. She sat with them. And as she did, something powerful happened. She stopped needing to be saved. She became her own anchor. She started painting again, something she had given up early in the relationship because Marcus said it was too self-indulgent. She reconnected with her best friend and apologized, not for choosing Marcus, but for disappearing in the process. She went to a weekend retreat alone, turned off her phone, and for the first time in years, she didn't feel guilty for simply existing without being productive for someone else. And slowly, she began rewriting her internal narrative. From "I wasn't enough" to "I was never meant to be consumed." From "I should have known" to "I see now, and that's what matters." From "I failed" to "I awakened." That shift wasn't loud. It was sacred, private. This is called nostalgic manipulation. The narcissist, sensing they're losing their grip, will reach back into the archive of your most tender moments. They'll send you an old photo, a song you once danced to, a vague, heart-tugging message. "I was just thinking about that weekend at the lake. You remember?" It's not an accident. It's not a coincidence. It's a calculated reach, designed not to reawaken love, but to reawaken vulnerability. They know you've grown. They feel the distance. So they pull from the one thing that still lives inside you: memory. But that memory is filtered, sanitized. It skips the nights you cried on the bathroom floor. It skips the guilt, the shame, the silent treatments. It zooms in only on the flash of intimacy that hooked you in the beginning. And if you're not careful, you'll lean in. You'll reply. And just like that, the hook returns. Another tactic they deploy is what psychologists call manufactured vulnerability. This is when they suddenly collapse in your presence, emotionally. They share a sob story, a confession, a dramatic admission. "I know I ruined everything. I'm just broken." At first, it feels like a breakthrough. You think, finally, they see it. They're opening up. But here's the truth: they're not confessing to heal. They're confessing to reset the power dynamic. By showing you their wounds, they appeal to your empathy. They disarm your logic. They distract from accountability. Example: them. "I think I'm a narcissist. I hate that I hurt you. I don't know why I do this." You. "Maybe this time it's real. Maybe he wants to change." But remember, recognition is not transformation. Tears are not truth. Vulnerability is not healing if it's weaponized to reset connection without responsibility. This is the final snare. A narcissist doesn't need you to love them again. They just need you to doubt your clarity. Once you do that, the cycle begins anew. It may look softer this time, more self-aware. But if the root hasn't changed, neither will the result. And here's where the deepest danger lies. If you go back, the damage cuts deeper. Because now, you're not just grieving what they did, you're grieving your own betrayal of self. The pain doubles. The self-trust fractures. The nervous system, once on the brink of peace, spirals again into vigilance. You start asking yourself not just "Why did he lie?" but "Why did I believe him?" again. This is the cruelty of the narcissist's final act. It doesn't just seek to pull you back. It seeks to make you complicit in your own undoing. You begin to internalize the failure, thinking, "I should have known better," or "maybe I'm the toxic one." But let's be clear, the manipulation wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a design. The last and perhaps most manipulative tactic is emotional guilt tripping cloaked as redemption. They don't beg. They don't scream. They martyr themselves. They say things like, "You were the only one who ever really saw me. I guess I really don't deserve love. You're probably better off without me." And suddenly, you're the caretaker again. Not because they've changed, but because you've been reactivated. They know you're wired for compassion. They know your heart doesn't shut off easily. So they position themselves not as abusers, but as abandoned children who just need one more chance. But what they truly want isn't a relationship, it's access. Access to your energy, your attention, your emotional labor. Once they have that again, the pattern resets. The same silence, the same devaluation, the same gaslighting. Only now, the hurt runs deeper because you returned knowing the truth. This is why the final trap is so dangerous. Because it doesn't appeal to your fear, it appeals to your love. It uses your best qualities, empathy, forgiveness, hope, against you. And that's what makes it so effective. You're not pulled back by force. You walk back willingly, believing it might be different. But narcissists don't change because they're sorry. They change when they do the deep inner work of dismantling the false self. And most never do. Because the mask is their identity. The illusion is their survival. Carl Jung once said, "People will do anything, no matter how absurd, to avoid facing their own soul." The narcissist will perform love. They will mimic depth. But they will not face the shadow within. They will not endure the death of the ego required for real transformation. Because to them, the ego is all they have. So if you find yourself tempted by the new version of them, the one who cries, confesses, clings, pause. Ask yourself not, do they love me? But, do I love myself enough to stay gone? That is the real test. Because the final manipulation isn't about pulling you closer. It's about pulling you away from your own clarity. And if you fail that test, if you return, you will face a pain more profound than the first time. Because now, you've betrayed your own awakening. And that pain, that psychic self-abandonment, is what keeps so many trauma survivors stuck. They know the truth, but they doubt their right to live it. So this is your moment. Not just to see the narcissist clearly, but to see yourself. You are not too sensitive. You are not dramatic. You are not broken for wanting love to be safe, honest, kind. You were never too much. You were simply with someone who gave you too little. Over and over again. And now you know. Now you see. And that vision is your protection. Not your fear. Not your rage. But your vision. Because once you see the final game for what it is, a performance without growth, you stop needing closure. You become it. You didn't imagine it. You didn't exaggerate it. You didn't make it all about you. What happened to you in the hands of a narcissist was real, calculated, and emotionally devastating. Not because you were weak, but because you were open. You showed up with your soul in your hands and were met with someone who saw that vulnerability not as beauty, but as opportunity. But now you've seen the cycle. You've named it. You've stepped outside of the trance and begun to witness what was once invisible. That is no small thing. In a world where emotional abuse is so often minimized, where trauma is dressed in the language of growth, where manipulation wears the mask of romance, clarity is revolution. You didn't just survive a narcissist. You awakened. And awakening is not a light switch, it is a sacred, often painful unfolding. You've seen the mask slip. You've felt the emptiness behind the charm. You've watched yourself shrink, justify, spiral, then rise. And in that rising, you reclaimed something irreplaceable, your inner authority. Carl Jung taught that individuation, the journey to becoming our whole self, requires us to face the shadow. The narcissist, in a twisted way, served that function. They showed you your own unconscious patterns. They exposed the ways you sought love through self-abandonment. They revealed how your childhood wounds still whispered truths into your adult relationships. And while that exposure hurt, it also freed you. Because now you know, love doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. Love doesn't gaslight your memory. Love doesn't make you prove your worth again and again. Real love holds space. Real love has edges. Real love protects your nervous system, not hijacks it. And you're allowed to want that. You're allowed to demand that. You're allowed to build a life so rooted in self-respect that anyone who cannot meet you there simply fades out of view. This ending is not about the narcissist. It's about you. Your return to center. Your commitment to your inner voice. Your decision, perhaps for the first time, to no longer explain your boundaries, apologize for your depth, or lower your standards in exchange for breadcrumbs of validation. You are not too intense. You are not too emotional. You are not too much. You are finally, beautifully, exactly enough for yourself. Healing after narcissistic abuse is not about erasing the past. It's about integrating it, understanding how it shaped you without letting it define you. You won't forget the pain, but you will outgrow it. You'll stop telling the story from the place of your wounds and start telling it from the place of your wisdom. Because now, you know the signs. You know what it feels like when affection is a strategy, not a sentiment. You know how your intuition whispers long before your mind catches up. You know that silence can be both punishment and sanctuary, and that the difference lies in who controls it. And if they come back, if they test the door, whisper apologies, invoke nostalgia, confess partial guilt, remember this. You are not obligated to reopen what nearly destroyed you just because someone knocks with flowers in hand. You owe no response to those who once fed on your confusion. Your silence is not cold, it is sacred. It is your boundary. It is your proof that you've chosen peace over the performance. Jung once said, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." But now, you are conscious. Now, you see. And with that vision, you break the cycle, not just for yourself, but for every version of you that doubted her worth in the mirror of someone else's dysfunction. So here's your final truth. The narcissist didn't change. You did. You stopped participating. You stopped explaining. You stopped believing that being loved required being less. And in that moment, the narcissist lost access, not just to your presence, but to your power. You don't need revenge. You don't need validation. You don't need them to admit what they did. Your healing is the proof. Your peace is the closure. Your boundaries are the justice. So now I leave you with this. You are not here to be consumed. You are here to be cherished. You are not responsible for fixing what someone else refuses to face. And you are not alone. Millions have walked this path. And now, so have you. Have you ever met someone who wore the perfect mask until you stopped playing their script? Share your experience in the comments. You never know who your truth will set free.